Sorry I missed you, or sorry that Schoology was down today. Here's what you need to know, and let's make sure we get started so you don't miss a thing. So, a couple heads ups. First of all, just keep in mind this class, you've got, of course, your reading journal number 1 is due, but also don't forget, before your next class, your second reading journal is also due. We're going to be doing a reading journal a day, so keep up there. Another important date coming up you might want to take a note of as this comes to your SOL. So if you are a DL kiddo, distance learning from home, on Monday, May 3rd, you guys are going to have your reading SOL at Blue Ridge at 9 a.m. in the cafeteria. We'll knock off your reading SOL, your last reading SOL in middle school. For those of you who are hybrid, Wednesday, May 5th, you are going to come to school like normal. It's a B day. You're going to go to your 5th block class for attendance and homeroom, and then you're going to go down to the cafeteria. You'll knock off your SOL for all 5th block, part of 6th block, and then you'll come back and you'll be ready to go for the rest of the day. So, little reminder on, or Ben, what are we doing? I'll give you that quick reminder. So, last class, if you remember, we went ahead and we did some of our SOL nonfiction review. We also looked at our literary nonfiction day 2 as we're reading into our books. In addition, we did our first reading journal and gave you guys time to work on that. In addition, making sure the independent work time was saved to go ahead and finish and submit your war poetry major summative. This class today, we're going to finish our nonfiction SOL review. We're going to do literary nonfiction day 3, and we're going to give you time in class and in independent work time to go ahead and knock off your second reading journal. So let's get going. Like the past couple classes, I'm going to go ahead and post a link right down here. It's going to be in the description of the video for you to go ahead and follow along and check out day 3 of our SOL review. So the first link you want to look at is day 3 of our SOL review. The second link you want to look at is going to actually look like this guy. Go ahead and make sure you click on that second link here to go ahead and take your quiz. We're going to go ahead and pause the video right now so you can go ahead and look at the first link to read through our day 3 and our second link to go and take your short 2-question quiz. Good luck. See you in a minute. Excellent. Now, without any further ado, let's move on. Let's talk about literary nonfiction day 3. So, remember the last class we talked about facts and central ideas and themes. We also talked to expect complexity. So in your reading journals that you did, some of you guys wrote about some of those central ideas and themes you were starting to see, and also, this was important, you also started to talk about explicit central ideas, which is where, the author comes out and says it. It's stated right there in the text. There's no ambiguity. They're telling you what it is. And some of you are also noticing some implicit central ideas. And those are those central ideas that you're implied, you have to infer, you kind of have to read between the lines because they're hinted at, but the author doesn't come right out and say it, right? So if we've taken a look, today we're going to talk about types of schema. So schema, that's a way of looking at things. And we're going to talk about that. So if we think about one of our war poems, Dulce et decorum est, we think back to that poem. In that poem, we saw some informational text like someone still was yelling out and stumbling, or behind the wagon that we flung him in, or of vile incurable sores on innocent tongues. But we also saw in some narrative text, so some things like bent double like old beggars under sacks, or as under a green sea I saw him drowning, or in all my dreams before my helpless sight. And if you think about those two, gosh, how are these first 3 sentences different from the last 3 sentences? And if you're thinking, well, the first 3, gosh, those kind of feel like they're just kind of telling you how it is, and the last 3 are really descriptive. You're right. You're right. That's those major differences here with types of schema. So something to keep in mind, right, when we're talking about narrative versus informational schema, think about things when we read narrative nonfiction. So sometimes when we read nonfiction, it sounds like a story. Obviously, the story is true. It's nonfiction. But you notice characters and setting and problems and resolution, just like fiction. That is called a narrative schema, when the author is sharing information through a story, right? At other times when we're reading nonfiction, though, right, we come across, it seems like we're in science class or history class, like we're looking at a textbook where it's looking at timelines and details and vocabulary and facts, and we're trying to make sense and put it all together. Well, that right there, that's informative or informational schema. So that's when the author uses details to go ahead and share information instead of a story, right? So what we want to do is we want to start thinking about when do we use our narrative schema and when do we use our informational schema? That's something we need to be thinking about. So let me actually show you something. When do I use which? Well, if we walk through this, narrative schema, readers of narrative schema are going to be looking for things like character traits. So could be like, how hardworking or how lazy or how thoughtful or how careless characters are, the way the characters interact with settings or even relationships between characters, sometimes what motivates characters or any conflicts they have, or even multiple themes or hidden issues. Now, at the same time, readers of informational schema, they're going to be looking for things like facts and dates and locations and details and vocabulary. They're trying to put this all together, kind of like reading a textbook. So when do I use which? Well, that's the thing. When it comes to literary nonfiction, which is what you're reading, it's both. So here's what that means for you as a reader. Since it's a mix of both, if you love narrative, so this is for the people who typically I prefer to read fiction because that's where my brain is. If you love narrative, then you have to pay really close attention to the informational passages, just because simply your brain's not going to be as adept or in tune with those informational passages. The opposite is also true. If you're more drawn to informational stories or nonfiction is what you prefer to read, then what we want you to do is pay a lot closer attention to the narrative passages because, again, your brain isn't necessarily in tune or in sync naturally with those narrative passages as some of your classmates. So if we take a look, that means you need to be flexible. If you're just reading fiction, your brain doesn't have to be flexible switching back and forth between those two schemas. Or if you're just reading nonfiction. But when you're reading literary nonfiction and you're getting both at the same time, your brain needs to be able to bend and fold back and forth between narrative schemas and informational schemas to be able to understand everything that's going on. To do. While you're reading, I want you to be jotting notes about what you notice when it comes to narrative schema. Remember, that's narrative schema again, that's where the author is sharing information through story. Pay attention to things about character traits, about relationships, about settings, or about motivations, or about themes. And also I want you to be paying attention and jotting notes about informational schema. Remember, informational schema, that's where the author is sharing information through details and facts instead of stories. So I want you to be noticing things like vocabulary and timelines and locations and facts and how all those pieces fit together. That's your job while you're reading. So actually, let's go ahead and pause for 10 minutes just so you can actually practice that. In your book, crack it open, and go ahead and get about 10 minutes worth of reading in and see what you can notice about things that are coming both in using your narrative schema, your story-like schema, and your informational schema, your kind of fact and detail oriented schema. Let's go ahead and pause that video for 10 seconds so you can go and get some reading for 10 minutes. Excellent. So one more thing you might need to know. We do have another reading journal, so it's located in the exact same spot. If you go to Schoology and go to our nonfiction folder, you're going to find in our reading journals folder, and you'll see reading journal numero dos right there. Here's what we want you to do. The prompt is actually going to be about, it says simply this, it says, after spending some time reading your nonfiction book, does the recent text sound more narrative or informational? Or does it contain some of both? If it leans more towards narrative schema, so if it feels more like a story being told than sharing details like in the textbook, then what does that imply regarding characters and setting and conflicts and themes? If, on the other hand, it leans more towards an informational schema, meaning it reads with all those facts and details kind of like more like a textbook than a story, then what does it imply about those ideas and supporting details, right? So go ahead and tell us the title of your book, the page that you're on, out of how many you need to read, and don't forget, we need to write at least 300 words and use those thought prompts. Those thought prompts are there for you. If you want that A+, make sure that you're, in addition to using the rest of the thought prompts, also using the yellow highlighted thought prompts. That kind of brings us here. This is what you got to knock out. So just a little reminder, we're going to be moving fast, guys. So over the next couple of classes, we already had reading journal number 1. It's done. We're working on reading journal number 2. That's due before you come back to class. Guess what we're doing next class? Reading journal number 3. Here's what this means. If you fall off the wagon, if you fall out of our Kurzman train that's just moving from one stop to the next stop to the next, if you fall off, you're going to have to catch up quickly because the train doesn't stop. In the same way that trains don't say, oh, hold on, there's somebody that isn't making it. Let's stop the whole train for this one person. We can't do that either. So it's up to you to grab an Uber and speed ahead and catch us at the next train station so you can hop back on and stay with us. So if you're behind, make sure you get caught up. Otherwise, if you have questions, go feel free to go and shoot me an email. Otherwise, good luck. You got this.